If you thought finding love through a classified ad was a risky move, wait until you hear this story. This isn't just a story about a woman who wants to start over. It's a story about a woman who bets everything on a man she's never met, based on a few handwritten notes and a promise from afar. Little does she know that her journey will not lead her to the idyllic home she's been hoping for, but instead it will thrust her into the heart of a brutal fight for survival in the wildest part of America. And there, amid the ashes of a burned-out house, she doesn't find a husband, she finds 8 orphans shivering in the dark, waiting for a miracle. This is a true story so moving and inspiring that you won't forget it. It's not just about sacrifice, but also a vivid example of how sometimes it's in the moment when we lose everything that we find the most meaningful things. Have you ever been at a point where you had to choose between giving up or moving forward in the darkness? If so, share your feelings in the comments below. And if you believe that the greatest strength always comes from the heart and determination, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on stories that can change the way you look at life. Katherine Walsh, 26, was not a widow, but she was no longer a young woman by the standards of her day. In Philadelphia, women like her were called cold and cruel names: overage, time widow, left behind. Her parents had died in a fire in a poor neighborhood, leaving her with debts, painful memories, and a precarious existence in a cheap boarding house where anyone who entered could sense the weariness and danger lurking behind every door. So when she came across a mail-order ad from a man named Samuel Morrisona, homesteader from Nebraska looking for a wife, she didn't think it was fate. It was simply a survival strategy. He wrote that he had lived for 6 years in the wilderness, looking for a wife who would share his hardships, not a young lady, not even a dreamer, but a woman with real strength, with determination, ready to build something lasting with him in that vast and harsh land. That letter had no sweet words, no vows of eternal love, but it was the simplicity and sincerity in each stroke that made Katherine read it over and over again, as if clinging to something so human, so real. And gradually she began to imagine Samuel's voice as he described the small house being expanded with more rooms, the fence being built stronger, and the small garden preparing the soil for her to sow the first seeds. In that imagination, she was no longer Katherine alone in the city, but a wife holding her husband's hand, building a warm home together. And then she replied to the letter, 1, then 2, then 10 letters. They exchanged small talk about childhoods, forgotten desires, hidden fears. Samuel, a 34-year-old man who lived 8 miles away from the nearest person, turned out to be a good listener and a good sharer. When Katherine confessed that she had no dowry, only a pearl brooch and a tarnished silver watch engraved with her father's name, Samuel replied, "I don't need wealth. I need a woman who knows the value of hard work." Samuel sent her money for her train ticket. She didn't love him, but she trusted him. It was the best thing she could feel at that moment. Trust, even as thin as a letter, was enough to get a person up and moving. And so Katherine left Philadelphia. 4 days and 3 nights on the train, passing strange stops with rough people, eyes not very friendly to a woman traveling alone. But she held on to the small leather bag that held all her possessions: 3 sets of clothes, a needle and thread, a few packets of cold medicine, vegetable seeds, an old Bible that belonged to her mother, and Samuel's letters, carefully tied together with ribbon. On the train, she sat quietly looking out the window, where the landscape gradually changed from brick houses and steel tracks to endless seas of grass. She had thought the sky in Philadelphia was vast, but only when she reached the Midwest did she realize how vast it was, making people so small that they could easily disappear. But instead of fear, Katherine felt free. For the first time in her life, she was not bound by someone's gaze, by gossip, or by invisible expectations. She was just a woman moving forward with a single belief that the man at her destination was waiting for her, and together they would start over. Arriving at Kearney, Nebraska, on a hot September afternoon, Katherine imagined Samuel standing there, blue shirt, brown cap, smiling slightly as he saw her step from the train. She imagined warm eyes looking at her and saying, "Here you are." But there was no one. No one came forward. No familiar eyes, no greetings, only the wind. A dry, sharp wind blowing with dust and an eerie silence. Samuel was not there. She waited, a long time. An hour, then two. Each time the crowd thinned, she edged closer to the station door, wondering if he was late or if something had happened to him on the way. A feeling of foreboding stirred in her unfamiliar, hard to name. But she reassured herself. It must be a glitch. He's a good guy. I read his letter. He's not a promise breaker. But will that trust be reciprocated, or will it burn down like the house she never set foot in? Katherine stood silently on the small platform of Kearney, where there were only a few sparse wooden houses, and the wind blew across the meadows like a mournful whisper. Samuel Morrison was not there. She had waited. She had imagined the moment when they would meet again and again during the long days of the train, but the moment did not come. No one called her name. No one held out a hand. There was only silence, and the strange looks of people busy picking up goods, loading things, and leaving. The train whistled and continued its journey west, leaving her alone. A man who worked at the station, old and seemingly used to seeing too many reunions and partings, said to her in a voice that was coldly calm, "If you're waiting for Sam Morrison, you're going to have to wait a long time. I heard his place burned down last week. Some people saw the flames all night." Enfruk. Katherine thought she had not heard clearly. Her ears were ringing. Her heart was slowing. She asked again, her voice trembling, as if hoping she had heard wrong. But the man just shrugged and pointed north. "If you want to know for sure, ask the Parkers. They're the closest to Sam." A few hours later, Katherine was riding in a horse-drawn carriage next to a hard-faced woman named Janet Parker. Janet was suspicious and sympathetic, occasionally glancing at the young woman sitting beside her, her dress rumpled and her eyes trying to keep calm. "Sam is a good man," Janet said as the carriage passed over the moors. "If he doesn't come for you, something must be wrong." The road to where Samuel had lived became rougher as they turned off the main road. The ground was dry and cracked. There was nothing around but sunburned grass and endless sky, and then they were there. Or rather, where it had been. Katherine was speechless. Ahead of her was a blackened expanse of earth, scattered with broken pieces of coal among shapeless ruins. The house that Samuel had described in tender detail, the sloping wooden roof, the porch with the swing, the windows facing the meadow, was now a pile of rubble. The smoke had long since died down, but the smell of ash and fire lingered. Janet stepped down first and led the way, but Katherine could barely move her feet. She found herself stepping over debris, not just of wood and stone, but of the faith she had carried with her from Philadelphia. A charred window still stood at an angle in the back corner of the house. A half-burned rocking chair lay tilted on the ground. Katherine could not help but weep when she saw it. Samuel had written in a letter that he was making a handmade rocking chair so she could sit on the porch and read every afternoon. "You will sit there, and I will read you some passages from Walden, which you loved." The gentle words now seemed like the last words of a dead dream. "No bodies." Janet's voice came from behind her, soft but firm. "Tommy husband and the neighbors came to put out the fire that day. They didn't find any bodies, just dried blood, footprints. He must have run away, or been taken. But whatever it was, Samuel wasn't there, and all that was left was the blackened ground, the traces of violence, and the silence of the prairie." Katherine circled the wreckage, looking at every detail as if searching for evidence that it had all been a mistake, that this wasn't the place she'd imagined during those long nights on the ship. But every burn, every fragment confirmed the truth. This had been a home, a promise, and now it was ashes. No one knew for sure what had happened. Some said it was robbers, others suspected a land dispute. But to Katherine, the cause no longer mattered. All she knew was this. The only dream she had ever dared to dream of had vanished before it could even begin. She had lost not only the husband she never had, but also the place she could call home. Katherine was still standing in the ashes as the late afternoon light began to tint the ruins with a pale yellow-grey. Her eyes stung, but not just from the old smoke, but from a growing emptiness in her chest. She thought she had hit rock bottom, until a very small, very faint sound made her look up. It was a moan, a faint breath like the sigh of the wind, but too close, too human. She turned toward the sound. Near the old foundation, between the collapsed beams, there was a wooden door half hidden with debris. She stepped closer, her heart pounding. It was the door to a root cellar, a type of storage cellar, often dug under houses to store roots, vegetables, and food for the winter. She bent down, peering into the crack, and then she saw eyes. 8 pairs of eyes, black and hollow with hunger and fear, stared at her from the darkness of the cellar. The oldest boy, maybe 14, stood in front of the younger ones, holding a rusty knife. The blade trembled, but his eyes did not. "Back off," he said in a hoarse voice. "We didn't steal anything. Don't hurt us." Katherine raised her hands, kneeling slowly to the boy's eye level. "No one is going to hurt you," she said, her voice choked with emotion. I just want to help." "Ah." No one answered, but she saw the hesitation flicker in the older boy's eyes. He looked back at the children behind him, a girl of about 12 trying to calm her little brother, a skinny blonde girl holding a scorched straw doll. None of them said anything, but they all looked at her, as if waiting to see if she represented danger or a chance for survival. "My name is Marcus," the last boy said, still holding his knife. We ran from somewhere else. Our house was attacked. My parents told me to go into the basement, but they never came back." Katherine clenched her hands, as if to keep herself from shaking. "How many of you?" she asked quietly. 8, including me." Marcus glanced back at the children behind him, then back at her, his eyes now filled with something tired and hopeful. Janet, who had been standing behind Katherine, leaned down and whispered, "Not Sam's. I've never seen them around here. Probably from another homestead that was robbed. There's been a few around." "We can't leave them here," Katherine said, and she didn't hesitate to say it. "Not in the middle of nowhere, not when it's almost dark." Janet sighed, matter-of-factly. "I understand. But Katherine, you just got here. You have nothing. No home, no money, no family. Where are you taking 8 children? Katherine looked back at the faces in the tunnel. Children who were hungry, cold, and most importantly, desperate. She remembered the moment she stepped onto this platform alone and scared. She remembered that feeling, and she knew she couldn't turn away. "They're coming with me," she said firmly. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but today I'm not leaving them here." Marcus, still not lowering his knife, asked softly, Are you sure?" Katherine nodded. "As sure as the sun will set tonight and rise again tomorrow morning." Marcus bowed his head, slowly sheathing his knife in his belt. It was a turning point. 8 children began to climb out of the dark tunnel, one by one. Barefoot, dirty hands, and eyes still filled with fear. But something had changed. Not the defensive look, but the clinging, the fragile trust. Little Emma, the youngest, said nothing. She just stood silently, holding the scorched straw doll behind Marcus's feet, staring at Katherine. Katherine bent down to her eye level, reaching out to stroke her hair. "I'm Katherine," she said softly. "You can call me anything you want." Emma didn't answer, but she took a small step toward her. Janet said nothing more. She helped the children into the carriage. No more questions about what's next or where are we going. Sometimes action was the answer. As the carriage pulled away from the blackened land, Katherine looked back once. The smoke was gone, but its echo still haunted her, not just the ashes of Samuel Morrison, but the dream she had brought with her from Philadelphia. She had come to find her husband. But it turns out fate brought her to become the mother of 8 children that no one wanted. The first week after bringing the 8 children home, Katherine filed for ownership of Samuel's old land under the Homestead Act. She knew full well that the land was no longer anyone's home. It had been abandoned, but if the law allowed a single man to build a home from the wasteland, why couldn't a woman do the same, even with nothing, and 8 children who didn't know what they would eat tomorrow? The local authorities, accustomed to strange resettlement stories, hesitated when they saw a woman claiming a homestead. But Katherine didn't ask for favors. She presented what she had. Her willpower, her need to survive, and her responsibility for 8 children who had no one else in the world. Finally, with a few signatures from the townspeople, she was approved. The first place they fixed up was the root cellar. She and Marcus cleared out the debris, reinforced the wooden doors, and lined the walls with hay, rags, and clay. They lived underground for weeks, in the dim light of oil lamps and the sound of wind whistling through the cracks in the wood above ground. It was not a house, but it was the first place in their lives where they could sleep without being woken by screams or gunfire. During the day, Katherine and the children collected usable wood from abandoned homesteads, traded it for food in the town, or helped others sow and gather herbs. Marcus learned to chop trees and build walls. Little Louise did the cooking and sewing. Little Will, quiet and shy, was especially good at observing animals, and he figured out how to bring water from a stream through a shallow trench. She taught the children how to clean wounds, identify herbs, and write letters with sticks on the dirt in front of the tunnel. One morning, when Katherine took the children to collect some seeds from the town station, Dr. Lyle, a widower living alone in the south, took the initiative and handed her an old medical kit and a basic medical book. "I have no children," he said shortly. "But if you intend to keep those little ones alive through the winter, you will need more than a stick and a prayer." Occasionally, Janet dropped by with toast, lard, and unkind advice. But her eyes were different. No longer the skeptical look she had for a strange woman from the East, but the look of someone who had come to respect something beyond her understanding. That first snowy night of the season was a test. The air had turned cold, and the snow had fallen unusually heavy. In the damp basement, little Eli had developed a fever. At first it was just a cough and shivering, but then his eyes grew blurry, his lips cracked. Katherine put her hand to his forehead and knew that the fever would not pass unless something was done. No doctors, no medicine, just Dr. Lyle's book, some basil, and the will of a mother who refused to lose anyone else. For 3 days and 3 nights, Katherine did not sleep. She applied warm compresses, gave Eli a spoonful of diluted ginger juice, and changed the cold towel every 2 hours. The other children took turns making the fire, pounding the herbs, keeping quiet. The whole root cellar became a makeshift hospital room, and a testament to what no one dared to call family. By the morning of the 4th day, Eli opened his eyes. He said nothing, just looked at Katherine and smiled weakly. But to her, that smile meant spring had come early in her heart. The group celebrated with some leftover honey and crackers, and for the first time, little Emma, who had always called her Aunt Katherine, muttered something else. A simple, soft word, but it made her choke up. "Mum." Then the others started calling her that too, by accident at first, then by choice. No one taught them, no one asked. But amid the rocks and the cold mud and the windy nights, she had gone from being a stranger to being the only thing they knew to call home. From being a stranger, they started calling her mother, and Katherine knew for the first time in her life that she was no longer alone. No longer a woman looking for a home, but one building it from the rubble with her hands, her mind, and a love that knew no conditions for its existence. By the second summer, Katherine's homestead began to attract attention. The lush vegetable patch, the laughter of children each morning, the steady smoke rising from the chimney each evening, of it was clear evidence of life rising from the ruins. In a land where life was often snuffed out by looting and violence, Katherine's homestead was a rare beacon of hope. But because of that, it became a target. Rumors spread quickly of a widow who had built an entire community out of nothing but a patch of wasteland and a few children. And then, like a vicious wind, the bandits who had burned down Samuel's homestead returned. This time, they targeted a more promising prospect. A house with no men, 8 children, and a lone woman. They thought it would be an easy break-in, but Katherine was prepared. She knew it would happen. For months, she had been training the children in secret. Marcus had been taught how to set traps. Louise had learned how to mix hot peppers and peppercorns to throw out as smoke. Will and Eli had been assigned to stand guard from the chicken coop where they had the most visibility. She had made them not soldiers, but protectors. The night the robbers came, the crescent moon was hidden behind thick clouds. The first sound was the heavy tramp of horses' hooves on dry ground. Marcus tapped 3 times on a tree near the coop as a signal that had been agreed upon. All the children took their positions. Katherine stepped onto the porch with a loaded shotgun, standing tall, her hand unshaken. 4 men rode into the yard. They sneered when they saw her standing alone. One of them dismounted, brandishing his whip, and approached. "Who do you think you are in this wasteland?" he sneered. "Women and children? You're holding on to something that doesn't belong to you." Katherine did not answer. She said only one sentence, clear and cold. "You burned my house once. You will not do it again." Then, without waiting a second, she pulled the trigger. The gunshot rang out in the quiet night, echoing across the field. The leader fell on the spot, the bullet lodged in his chest. The other 3 panicked, not yet understanding what was happening, surrounded by screams, smoke, and booby traps all over the yard. One was caught in the trap, fell down, and Marcus hit him with a stick and disarmed him. The other had pepper spray thrown in his eyes by Will, screaming and staggering into the darkness. In just a few minutes, the attack was over. No one in the house was hurt. The robbers left behind a dead body and 2 captives tied to porch posts until the patrol arrived. News of the defense spread throughout the area. It was said that a woman had shot a robber with a single shot, and that the children in her house were intelligent, brave, and organized like a real military unit. When asked how a woman could do such a thing, Katherine simply said, "They thought they were attacking a woman, but in fact they were just declaring war on a mother defending her family." Years have passed since that night. The little house has been rebuilt many times, larger, more solid. From the makeshift root cellar that was their first refuge, a small community has grown up around it. They call it Walshburg, after the woman who first planted a flagpole on the forgotten land. The 8 children Katherine saved are now adults. Marcus became a doctor, opening a clinic in the middle of town, where every poor child is treated free of charge. Louise became a teacher, founding the first school in the area, teaching farm children to read, write, and be kind. Will started a small machine shop, which grew into a business supplying farm tools to the surrounding area. Each of Katherine's children chose their own way to give back what they had received, opportunity. Katherine never left that place. Though she was invited to Washington to advise on settlement and community development policies, she always returned home. "I was not born here," she said, "but this place made me." One late winter, with her hair almost gray and her hands weak, Katherine wrote a letter to a young girl in Oregon who had just rescued 6 children from an abandoned farm and was struggling between the roles of nurturer, protector, and guide. Katherine wrote only a short paragraph. "You don't need to find strength. You will find it when there is no turning back, as I have seen in the ashes."